Morning, everyone.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Morning, everyone. Appreciate your time. I'll introduce myself a little bit more into the presentation as well. But obviously, I'm here to talk about sound. I was hoping there'll be a few more skeptics, but it sounds like everyone's kind of aligned on the same page. I do like a challenge, but I think it will go pretty smoothly today anyways. So let's just kick it off. Let me just quickly close the door, sorry. So sound as an input in the modern world, intentionally designed acoustic environments for focus, sleep, and human performance. So I just want to start with some relatable examples of how sound can drastically affect our physiology. Maybe it's something very simple as you're at your desk and you hear a notification or you hear your phone ring. Or maybe it could be a baby crying in the next room or in the same room. Or maybe you're walking home at night and then you hear footsteps behind you. Your body tenses, your breathing changes, adrenaline kicks in. Or maybe something a bit more abstract, like you're in a cinema and you hear someone talking loud behind you, assuming that annoys you. So the matter of fact is, sound is one of our senses. It's been, evolutionarily speaking, it's been adapted as a signal for safety, communication, rhythm, connection, but most importantly, for our survival. So there's absolutely no doubt that sound does have the potential to drastically affect our physiology. But the frame I'm looking at it at is, if we can understand through these coincidental scenarios that sound can change our state, what is the potential of using sound intentionally? What does it look like when we use sound intentionally? So I just want to start by prefacing the way things are going in the modern world. I like to truly believe attention is the currency of the 21st century. We're now navigating a world of rising technology, a time where access to information is at its all-time high. At the same time, there's access to distraction is also at an all-time high. So just for context, smartphones has only been around for 30 years and humans have been around for over 300,000 years. So we're certainly living in a time of unprecedented implications of overstimulation, which in fact is inherently linked to the rise of a lot of mental health related issues. On the topic of sound, in the last 100 years, based on the average urban Australian environment, it has increased by 15 to 20 decibels, which is equivalent to being 4 times louder. That might not mean a lot on paper, but the way I see it is things are only going up. And the value to be able to live life with more intention, to be able to efficiently allocate our energy and time and resources to the things we want to do more intentionally is increasingly becoming more valued. So I just want to start with a bit of my background. So I spent most of my life as a civil engineer. So I certainly value high level execution. I'm used to working in high pressure environments, and I value just having a pragmatic frame in all aspects of life. And this is also applied to my approach to Neuronest to explore the intersection of neuroscience, sound engineering, and human physiology. It was about 3 years ago, I decided to, that was the tail end of working in fly-in, fly-out work for a couple of years, slogging the trenches, but made a fair bit, enough so to pack my bags and travel the world with one objective in mind. Every day I had to get out of my comfort zone, and every day I had to learn something new. Safe to say I learned a lot about human nature. And when I got back to Australia, I realized construction wasn't it, long story short. But it was at the same time that I realized the potential of AI. I know AI is very controversial, but the way I saw it was back in university, in first year biomed science, I did a year of biomed. And I remember specifically, we spent a whole term just trying to understand a research paper. It's just so complex. There's just so many there's just so much to take into account: the nomenclature, the literature, the technicalities, the science. That it's just so much effort. But now with the advent of AI, I just saw massive potential in the sense that we can just synthesize all this research to the criteria that we're looking for. In this context, looking at it from a frame of how can sound affect our physiology. So about 12 months ago, I decided to sack engineering and put all my efforts into learning about sound. So safe to say, I definitely went crazy. There's a lot, but I certainly learnt a lot, and I'm keen to share with you guys some key insights that you can take away with respect to the workplace. I've been using sound intentionally for about 10 years, but for the biggest time, I was just using it because I just knew it worked, but I didn't think twice about how and why it worked. It was obviously when I came back and I was dabbling with AI that I realized, man, AI is the ultimate problem solver. You just need to have problems. So then I wanted to explore all the problems of sound, ultimately. I would consider myself a high performer, not in an arrogant sense, but just in a sense of just aspiring towards my potential. So I do look at things in the frame of being practical. I definitely value physical development. I train every day religiously, and I like to run and climb. Recently, I did go to set up a camp in the top of Cozy. It's pretty sick, so I thought I'll share my view. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. But the whole point of that was just to show that I do look at things in a practical sense, and I am working towards just any tool that can help me improve my productivity. So the structure of today's presentation, I want to start with going through the science of sound. I think that's obviously fundamental in understanding how we can actually apply it. The second section will be real-world applications, mechanisms. For the sake of sound in the workplace, I had to try my best to just think about how can I value the time to just give you guys something to take away. And I thought it would be best use of time to talk about sleep and focus. And then we'll finish off with some implementation and a bit of a discussion. So let's start with a bit of science. So sound, from air pressure to physiology. So I'm just going to go through, so this is just the board, and I'll just go through it here. Oh. Sorry about that. So essentially sound is mechanical vibration. It's pressure in the air, and then it gets processed in our ear. Outer ear, there's bones that vibrate, goes to inner ear, there's fluids, the hair membrane, and essentially it goes into, transfers into the auditory nerve, up the brainstem, and then into the auditory cortex. We attach emotion to it, and then it gets processed by our consciousness. The way I like to distinguish this is it becomes mechanical, neurological, there's involuntary actions, and then there's a conscious action. This process also explains why one sound that affects someone may affect someone differently. Most sounds affect everyone differently, to be honest, but it also just shows the complexity of why sound is just not, it's not definitive, because we all have our own subjective experiences and emotions that we tie to sound. For instance, any sort of trauma, but that's an easy one to talk about. And then obviously your consciousness, which is directly tied to your subjective experiences. But that being said, there are still physical responses that are inherent to how our body works, particularly in the brainstem. That's very much linked to our autonomic nervous system, how we respond involuntarily to stimulus, sound being a stimulus. there's absolutely no doubt it has an effect on our physiology, physical and physiologically. So let's move on to how do we know what works? Or more so, how has it been researched in the past? Just pull up this. So out of all the research I've looked at, it pretty much came down to 4 methods. We can look at the brain through EEG scans, fMRI, MEGs, which is pretty much the one I'm most interested in. We can look at the body, just autonomic nervous system, heart rate, just physiology, behavior and performance, and subjective experience. The latter is more so anecdotal. But the ironic thing about sound is that typically anecdotal experiences is poorly supported in the science world. But in this case, it does have quite a weight, because at the end of the day, if you feel worse, then it's obviously not productive. That might sound like a challenge, but to me, that's inspiration to just the potential of sound. Since I want to talk about the EEG, I think it's super important to look at what do these instruments, apparatus look like physically. So essentially, the EEG is sensors on your head that just essentially measure the primary brainwave states. The interesting thing about the neuroscience is that we have been able to show that there are typical brainwave patterns that are associated with certain emotions and certain activities. You also see fMRIs, which is essentially looking at the blood flow, which tells you at which region of the brain is firing. And then you also will see MEG, which is a bit more inaccessible, bit more expensive. It looks at the neural field, but it's not as common. For the sake of this, we'll look at more deeply into the EEG. It's definitely worth looking at, going deeper to understand just how sound is sort of commercialized. You'll hear these terms quite commonly used, but it kind of stems from understanding the electroencephalography. So in the EEG, you'll see 5 primary brainwave states. On the low end, delta is associated, you got slow waves, which is associated with sleep and recovery. And on the higher end, you got things like gamma, which is associated with deep focus, complex cognition, and also more meditative states in between. But the thing to note is that all 5 primary brainwave states coexist throughout the day. But there is a predominant shift of where a region's predominantly, let's just say a region's predominantly alpha in your prefrontal cortex, let's just say, that will be conducive to wakefulness or feeling calm. A better way to conceptualize it is looking at a typical circadian flow in a day. You wake up, your cortisol goes up, and your delta and your theta, delta go down, and your alpha and beta go up. Until nighttime, your beta goes down and your delta goes up. This is very much associated with your autonomic nervous system as well. But once again, it's just so fascinating that we have been able to associate predominant primary brainwave states with certain tasks. For instance, if I'm figuring out a math problem, the science will show that there is more beta brainwave patterns predominantly in my left hemisphere, for instance. There are nuances with that as well, because with more stress, there is more anxiety, but there is a distinction, just a side note. I know that if you look at anxious brains, there is a lot more beta primary brainwave states, but that's in the right hemisphere. That's a little bit more technical, but just some shifts practically with respect to our day, waking up, delta, theta, alpha, fully awake and working, alpha, beta, deep thought, creative meditation, theta, alpha, deep focus and learning, should be beta and gamma. Falling asleep, we have to shift to delta to essentially get into deep sleep And I'll touch more on that in the second section. The thing is, the brain is quite complex, obviously. There's so many parts, and it's not right to say just because the frontal lobe is related to execution that a predominant alpha brainwave state in the frontal lobe is always going to be conducive to us getting work done. There's just so many variables.
Dion, sorry to interrupt, but there's a couple of questions in the chat, so I think this is a good opportunity to maybe. Okay. So, how is, if remembering that we're all in business?
Yep.
So, how, for example, or why is like theta state important?
I guess this is the context for the second section. The second section is the real world applications. Okay. I feel like understanding these states is fundamental to understanding how it can actually help us focus and how it can help us sleep. Yeah. Let me just have a quick look. This is interesting. I'm finding it difficult to understand elements of my business other than sound when it comes to social media. Yeah, that's so fair. It really comes down to promoting an environment where you're reducing distraction, prefacing that we are living in a world of overstimulation, and just the impact of how often we actually get distracted without even knowing, and how much time it takes to actually get back into deep focus. But I'll get to that in the second section. But feel free to ask more questions. So just before I get to real world applications, I want to just talk about the history. Jeez, where do we go? Okay. So lost it, but I'll just use this for now. So in the 12 months, I actually did write a learner's guide, which just goes through all the deep science of what I've learned. But I've tried my best to condense it to obviously something that's practical. But on the topic of history, it started in 1839, about 200 years ago, just under, where we discovered it as an observation. It wasn't until 50 years later, thereabouts, that we essentially had the EEG, which allowed us to actually determine the brainwave patterns. 1920, massive, we were able to distinguish the primary brainwave states to essentially associate these typical brainwave patterns with emotions and activities. And then up until the 1980, that's when isochronic tones came into play. And I'll talk about that in the next section as well. This is something I use religiously. And then there was a bit of commercialization, early 2000s. But I felt like it was a time where there was just a lot of skepticism and there was just a lot of things going around in the world. So I guess this was on the back burner. And to be fair, yeah, the science was quite weak. Up until 2010, I'd say there's a lot more research, modest evidence to show that isochronic tones, brain entrainment, and acoustic masking have drastic effects on our ability and our physiology. And in this case, our ability to perform. And in the last 2 years, we've seen a lot more AI, just a lot more technology to do with adaptive soundscapes that essentially respond or are created based off our biometric feedback, which to me is an indication of a start of massive potential for sound. So, all right, we've just gone pretty deep into the science. I want to bring it back to the surface. I want to preface the next session with a bit of relatability. So I just want to open the floor with a question. What is one sound that makes you feel calmer and one sound that makes you feel energized? If you're going to use music, just specify maybe the genre. No. Maybe. Mm. Yep. Mm. Yeah, trauma victims is obviously very sensitive, and it really comes down to their subjective experiences. So I would start with obviously understanding and awareness to understand what is the type of traumas, because everyone's going to respond to sound differently ultimately, but there are fundamental things like slow wave oscillations, calming music that is very much linked to activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which is associated with a calmer state, which is associated with a reduced heart rate. Sound. Right music for sure. Nice. Okay. Pretty good answers. No right or wrong, but I can't stand. Yeah, that's so interesting. Okay. Nice. We'll crack on. Real world applications. At the end of the day, it's just like, what can I do with this information, and how can I actually go home and implement something today? That's kind of the takeaway, right? The flow noise. Yeah. So, in the research I've done over the last 12 months, I started with the frame of how can sound affect our physiology across the board, just anyway, and just seeing what the research is saying. Ultimately, I categorized it into 8 fields, but for the sake of today, I feel like it's most value for your time to understand how we can apply it to improve our sleep and how we can apply it to improve our focus. The mechanisms I'm looking at is acoustic masking and rhythmic entrainment, and I'll go through those in the context of sleep and focus. So acoustic masking. Acoustic masking is the mechanism that allows sound to be both conducive. It answers the question of how can a sound be both conducive to focus and sleep? Immediate response is that doesn't really make sense, but if you actually understand the mechanisms, it's all towards reducing your distraction, which is conducive to both focus and sleep. It's actually all around us. You might have heard acoustic masking through color noise implementations like white noise, pink noise, brown noise. Acoustic masking is also in the form of nature ambience, rain, waves, crackling, HVAC fans, air conditioning. Even I've seen a lot more commercialization around baby toys, sleep machines, and hardware. So there's no doubt it's becoming more utilized in the modern world. So let's look into how does it actually work. I like to explain acoustic masking because it's quite a simple yet powerful concept to understand. So how does it actually work? So imagine that you're going to sleep and you hear a door slam in the distance. Let's just use a scale from 0 to 10, 10 being the distraction is enough to wake you up. So let's just say that door slam is a 6. So the relative difference from 0 to 6 is the distraction level. With acoustic masking, you're essentially increasing your baseline. So let's just say it increases your baseline to 4 or 5. So that 6 to your nervous system only becomes a 2. That's the fundamental mechanism. And that reduction of the salience, the reduction of the distraction, is both conducive to focus environments and sleep. That is the same mechanism of why rain, why waves, why some of these things actually make you feel calmer. It's just making your brain less scattered. or less distracted, let's just say, because the reality is the modern world is very overstimulated. Now, you might have heard color noises: white noise, pink noise, brown noise. Essentially, they're just different frequencies on the spectrum, on the graph, where white noise is quite flat, quite very much like a hissing noise. I like to use brown noise quite a lot, although I still use white noise for studying. To sleep, I like to use brown noise, which is favored more in the lower end compared to pink noise. So the key difference between pink noise and brown noise is pink noise has more energy in the higher end, and brown noise is just a little bit deeper. You can think of a brown noise like rumbling, like an airplane cabin, if you like. And pink noise is essentially associated, if you were to take rain and then put it onto the sound profile, it would essentially represent the pink noise spectrum. So a lot of nature, like ocean waves and stuff like that, it's all frequency. It's all sound that's recorded, that can be recorded onto a spectrum, an EQ, which will show you this profile. And that's the interesting thing. It's actually quite a simple mechanism. But I've been using acoustic masking forever, and it's just, you would see immediate benefits, practically speaking. Okay, let's move on. I guess the main thing to note is that not all white noise, pink noise, and brown noise are the same, because sound is quite complex. There's still a 3D element to it, which is your texture and your timbre. I spent a bit of time learning sound engineering, music theory, and sound theory to really understand how we can actually produce sound. So I actually do produce the sounds too. And in that sense, there are different variations of white noise, there are different variations of pink noise, different variations of brown noise. I picked these three because they're the most common, but there are different ones, but these are the most conducive, in my opinion. Because if you just quickly look at the other ones, there's a lot more higher frequencies, so right off the bat, it would just sound annoying. It's like a high-pitched frequency. For different utility, but not practical for today's presentation. Yep, so we'll move on to sleep in a modern world of overstimulation. So I just want to start this section with a few statistics that I put out. So 2024, 1 in 3 adults sleep less than 7 hours. 4 in 10 Australians get inadequate sleep. 44% of people on their phones 10 minutes of waking and falling asleep. 90 to 99% of teenagers use their screen 2 hours before bed. On average, 186 phone checks a day, roughly 1 every 5 minutes. That's crazy. Melatonin subscription's gone 600% since the last decade. This is alarming, and it's only getting worse. The overstimulation is inherently impacting our sleep. Oh, please be aware that only the 2/3 of the screen is same. Okay. So let's talk about sleep. Our brain and our autonomic nervous system essentially have to downregulate for our body to get into sleep. To talk about your autonomic nervous system high level, the easiest way to talk about it for the sake of this is parasympathetic, associated with your rest, digest, rest and recovery, and your sympathetic is your fight or flight. It's when you're alert. When we are alert, our brain has, you would expect to see high frequencies which are associated with your sympathetic nervous system And essentially, it makes it hard for your brain to get into the first stages of sleep. We need to favor and shift into our parasympathetic nervous system. That's when your arousal drops, breathing slows, heart rate settles, temperature regulation changes, parasympathetic becomes more prominent, and the brain moves towards slower rhythms. So how does sound actually fit into this picture? Intentionally designed sound can help it create the conditions where the brain and body are more likely to move into sleep. Of course, it's not magically going to make you sleep. You're still going to have to sleep, but it's going to promote an environment that signals to your body that ultimately you are safe, but signals slow wave oscillations, signals less arousal. It just down regulates. And that's the issue with phones, because it's so stimulating. It essentially alerts your brain that we are not in a safe environment, or we're in an environment where we need to switch on, we need to be alert. And that inherently ties into our autonomic nervous system. It's not just the blue light, it's also the stimulation, obviously. So let's take a step back and look at the sleep cycle. Now, the interesting part is that in each stages of the sleep, there are brainwave patterns associated. And to break it, I want to take a more holistic step here to provide some information just to conceptualize sleep. So it's broken down into two stages, ultimately, or 4 stages, 2 parts. There's your non-REM sleep, and there's your REM sleep. Your non-REM sleep, stages N1, N2, N3. N3 is associated with your deep sleep, which is linked to physical development, and your REM sleep quality is directly linked to your emotional and cognitive regulation. Now, the interesting part is that our deep sleep is front-loaded in the initial cycles of the night. What does that mean? This means that if we don't time our sleep cycles with our circadian rhythm, it's obviously going to be linked to poorer sleep quality, in the sense that sleeping 8 hours at 4 a.m. is obviously going to feel so different to sleeping 8 hours at 10 p.m. What's interesting about these sleep cycles is that N2 of your sleep, let's go back to the sleep cycle. In your light sleep, to get into N3 sleep, there needs to be a certain amount of theta wave production. If it doesn't, it directly impacts your deep sleep quality, which directly impacts your physical recovery. And that's important, especially when you consider the fact that we're just so stimulated, and our sleep hygiene, our ritual leading up to sleep, has been hijacked by modern technology and smartphones on average. So what can we do? What can we do about it, and how can we use sound? I'm just going to explain what I've been doing pretty much since I started construction. That was the first time where I was exposed to 12-hour days. I had to leave the house at 5:30 every day for about 7 years. And that being said, I remember I just struggled to sleep, get enough sleep. It wasn't until maybe the first year in, the tail end, I was probably maxing out at 6 hours sleep. And I was just trying to find a way, and I came across, just coincidentally, brown noise. I used it, it worked, didn't think much of it, used it throughout the week, and then I realized this is actually helps a lot. And since then, I wouldn't say I've been using it every day, but it's religiously in my routine and something I highly advocate. And that mechanism is acoustic masking. That's one of the few that can actually help you sleep. But that is one key takeaway that I can confidently advocate for as far as improving your sleep directly by targeting the onset, targeting the period leading up to sleep. So the protocol I would also suggest is 30 minutes before you sleep, put on acoustic masking, whether that's white noise, pink noise, or brown noise, comfortable enough that it's there, but not too loud that it's stimulating. And more importantly, it's a combination of your autonomic nervous system. This is a little bit of a tangent to sound, but as we all know, we have to downregulate through our breath. Yeah, that's also part of the ritual practice, which is actually one of many ways we can signal our body to downregulate. And sound can also be used as a ritual. And yeah, so what I do religiously is box breathing. 4 seconds inhale, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds exhale, 4 seconds hold. Ultimately, if we extend our exhale, that's longer than our inhale, it immediately reduces your heart rate. That's the simple truth of our physiology. It signals to our body that we're safe, and it reduces our heart rate, which shifts towards the parasympathetic nervous system, which allows us to get into sleep more easily. And that's important. So let's move on. Does anyone have any questions about the sleep section before I continue to the focus? Okay, all good. I'll just carry on. So talking about focus, I'm also going to look at how to listen to brown noise. So there's actually
sorry, Dion, there is one question in the chat, how to listen to brown noise.
Yep, you can use your phone. You can have it on speaker. Obviously, you don't want to be looking at your screen for too long. Let's see. Oh yeah, definitely. CPAP machines. Yep. Yeah, just your phone's fine. But you want to just figure out which one works for you. Everyone's a little bit different, but the mechanism's still acoustic masking. Oh, just to touch on sleep as well. I was looking into the science of what happens when we leave it on for the whole night. And it's quite mixed in terms of pink noise acoustic masking. But I would say for certain, that if you're living in the city, let's just say, and you just have noise that wakes you up throughout the night, or you just have sound stimulus throughout the night, absolutely no doubt acoustic masking is going to improve your sleep. Okay, let's move on to focus. Using sound to improve your focus. This is a huge part of my practice, and I want to just quickly deviate to some stats to just show the implications of the modern world. So 20 years ago, 2004, screen time was an average of 2.5 minutes, and now it's at 47 seconds. At the same time, I'd like to make an association. ADHD prescriptions has increased 11-fold in the last 20 years. It's only going up as well. 63% of people check their notifications within 60 seconds. And on average, it takes about 20 minutes to get back into deep focus after being interrupted. Stats by Microsoft 2025, 2 minutes between interruptions at your desk, around 275 times a day. So putting all these stats together, we are just constantly being distracted. So to have the ability to have tools to improve our focus is increasingly becoming more valued. And I realized the potential of sound not only is something that I use, but it's something that could help a lot of other people. And this is how we can use it for our workplace. That was the tie that I found it. I wanted to be as pragmatic as possible. There was a lot of other topics I could talk about, but I feel like within an hour, this is the best value for time. So let's talk about focus. It's important to note that sound is a container for attention and intention, and not a shortcut around effort. At the end of the day, it's not magic. You still got to want to do it. It's no different than filling the effects of meditation with the intention of obviously getting in a state of mindfulness. The mechanism here is rhythmic stimulation. What's that? I can't believe this. Yeah, so true. So let's talk about brain entrainment. Brain entrainment is the brain's tendency to align its neural rhythms with repeated external stimulation. In sound-based tools, this is used to gently guide the brain towards patterns associated with alertness, relaxation, or sleep. In this case, I want to talk about focus. At the same time, it also acts as a ritual or a signal to allow the brain to know, okay, this means we're ready to work, or this means we're going to do some work. It also allows us to reduce our distractions, and with that statistic before, how long it takes to get back into focus. If we can just reduce our distractions, we're inherently improving our productivity. To understand this mechanism further, I don't want to really go too deep into it, but it's the auditory steady state response and the following frequency response. These are the neural responses that the science shows that you can look at if you are interested to see the strength of how our brainwaves are actually synchronizing to this auditory stimulation. So what does this actually mean in practice? This just means we can get into focus faster and we can stay focused for longer. So through the implementation of brain entrainment, I'm looking at two main ones, binaural beats and isochronic tones. That pretty much covers like 95% of the brain entrainment world. And I'm sure you've all heard of binaural beats. So I'll just quickly go through that. Essentially what it is when you have two carrier tones, sound frequencies, and they're played at a slightly different frequency where the difference is processed in your brainstem and essentially triggers a stimulus of rhythmic stimulation that is then associated with, it pushes your brain to create these environments that are conducive for the associated primary brainwave states. And isochronic tones, similarly with the rhythmic stimulation, it's like a pulse. So it's how many times per second it's pulsating. Now I'll conceptualize this better through this example here. So let's look at binaural beats. Let's just say, for instance, you have 200 hertz in your left, 210 hertz in your right ear. That's a difference of 10 hertz. That's associated with your alpha state production because you're in your 8 to 12 hertz. That essentially gets processed in your cochlea, different to isochronic tones. So the rhythm here is produced internally. Isochronic tones, the rhythm is produced externally. So in this case, let's just use that same 10 hertz. 10 hertz is essentially how many times per second is it pulsing. So the difference as well, practically speaking, is that isochronic tones, you don't actually need speakers. Oh, sorry, you don't actually need earphones, whereas binaural beats, you have to wear earphones. Personally, I don't use binaural beats a lot, only for sound production purposes and just to hear what things sound like. But for truth be told, I mainly use isochronic tones and pretty much every day, to be honest. But there's just so much potential here that inspires me to really explore the potential of sound. Yep. I did find in my own journey of sound production, when I'm working with isochronic tones, that when we're looking at anything above 15, the pulses kind of sound the same. So it is quite limited in the range, but it can certainly be quite effective in this alpha beta range. Everything past 15 hertz per second kind of sounded the same. So that was the limitation there from my experience. But what does that mean for me? The potential of isochronic tones, this is huge. This is massive. It essentially is a layer. The way I see it, you can layer the isochronic tone on a track. It all comes down to spatialization, psychoacoustics, sound engineering. How can we layer that rhythmic stimulation in an existing track so that sound frequencies don't interfere, but the brain can still pick up the rhythmic stimulation to induce brain entrainment? And that's kind of the world I'm in now. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to listen to a boring sound. Acoustic masking is quite neutral, but let's just say for focus or for more upbeat arousal, you want... I love music. You know, I can understand how people will gravitate to focus tracks, to brain entrainment a lot more if we could actually cover more genres and just open the door for me, it opens the door to creative freedom, because I feel like, wow, this really means that I can, and this is what I'm exploring. The science shows modest evidence that we can layer isochronic tones to still induce brain entrainment. So, implementation, that was the end of focus. Any questions on that end?
So, yeah, I always thought that when my clients were in that deep, just before deep sleep mode, where they feel like they're asleep, but they can still hear what's going on around them. I always thought that was like the alpha mode, but it's actually the theta. Is that right?
Well, if you can hear what's going on around you, I still dare say that's light sleep. So if you look at the sleep cycle, I'd say it's still very much light sleep. And that means that there's still alpha and alpha theta coupling, but probably not enough theta to go into deep sleep.
Okay, because they quite often say, I felt like I was asleep, but I could still hear what was going on around me. They were still kind of aware. Yeah. But they were very,
And there could be some nuances of the REM sleep as well.
Yeah.
Pretty much all stages of sleep, the parasympathetic is dominant, and which is the one that's associated with just rest and recovery. Except for REM. REM is the only one during your dream sleep where you have pulses of sympathetic.
I mean, to the stage where they're actually snoring.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so they feel like they're asleep, they're snoring, but they can still hear things going on around them.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could even be deep sleep as well. But I guess to answer your question specifically, I would say that if I was to take an EEG scan, it would show alpha, theta, and it would obviously show alpha, theta, and very low beta concentration.
Yeah. So maybe alpha on the way to theta.
Yeah, exactly. And then transitioning that at a later stage to theta to enhance the deep sleep, for instance.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Implementation and discussion. So just a summary of my protocols, just to summarize everything we've just gone through in the second section. Practically, I use acoustic masking to help me sleep. There's also obviously theta wave soundtracks, slow wave oscillation soundtracks, but there is the most practical, which I can hang my hat on for sure, with all the evidence, is obviously acoustic masking. And coupled with box breathing, coupled with breath work, is essential to downregulate your body to get into that state of sleep. And for focus, I use Pomodoro. So that's just setting 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, just having intentional breaks and having these periods of 30 minutes or 1 hour, 50-10 cycles, where you're intentionally taking a break as well, because that's just as conducive to sustaining your productivity as well. And sound can also work not only through the rhythmic stimulation, but also as a ritual, not only to get in, but also to signal rest, to shift your body, to actually rest properly, active recovery, which overall is more conducive to productivity in the long term. And I'm speaking as someone who used to work 12 plus hours every day for such a long time. But now I look at it as, why would you work 12 hours when you can get it done in 6 hours? And just being more intentional with your time, because as you practice, well, for me, as I practice more Pomodoro, 30 minutes, it's amazing how much you can get done in 30 minutes, let alone an hour, when you're not distracted, when you're completely focused onto one specific task. Yep. But yeah, the most important thing for all this is just obviously being intentional. Of course, if you're going to go to bed with acoustic masking while you're watching a video, that's obviously not ideal. And same thing with focus. If you're putting your phone on, looking at your phone every minute, you're going to obviously be distracted, which in terms of performance and productivity in the workplace is just not ideal. So what can we do? I want to just open the floor to just see, after today's presentation, what's one thing, where in your day would a predictable sound environment remove friction? Or what's one thing you can do to implement sound in your day-to-day or your workplace?
Well, for me, it's to get that for when I'm actually working at the computer, and to have that music in the background that helps me focus on what I'm doing, rather than, because quite often I will have my phone next to me while I'm on the computer, and I'll be distracted by notifications that come in. Even during this, I've been distracted by just little notifications that have come in.
Yeah.
But yeah, just but I feel like I need to have it there. I feel like just in case somebody calls. So
yeah, exactly. Time notifications.
But just to have that music running to help me work.
Yep. For sure. Set timers. Yeah, I need quiet when I'm working. So in terms of people who typically work with quiet, in that sense, acoustic masking is an exceptional alternative to silence. Yeah.
So Dion Merrick mentioned a sound ritual. So what would you recommend? What would you
well, a sound ritual is really just anything that you're religiously using, just like as long as you create enough emotional association through practice and consistency that your body signals, oh yeah, this is a sound, which means I'm going to be studying. So in terms of focus, it's either rhythmic stimulation, isochronic tones, brain entrainment, or acoustic masking is what I would recommend. Because at the end of the day, there's so many sounds, right? But that's the underlying mechanisms that are just fundamental to understand in choosing the right sounds. I do have some recommendations as well. In terms of rhythmic stimulation, isochronic tones, I really like Jason Lewis. I'm also making sounds as we speak, and I'm developing an app. But I got to give these guys credit because I've been using their stuff since the beginning of time, and I feel like he was creating music since it was during a time where it was just so skeptical. So I feel like he's definitely, gone through a lot in that sense in his sound journey. In terms of calming, in terms of sound bowls and all that, I feel like there's a lot of people in this crowd who would resonate with Martin's music. I really rate him for, particularly if you're doing therapeutic practices. Not so much the mechanisms we're talked about today, but just holistically looking at the crowd today, I feel like Martin would resonate better. Just the bells and metals. Definitely give it a go. Jason Lewis. I tried it. There's a 3-hour study with me, Jason Sung, 15-year learning coach. That one's more mechanistic, and it's amazing how it works, honestly. I use this religiously. But then also you can just experiment as well with white noise, brown noise on Spotify or YouTube. There are some that they just whack in the word alpha, chuck in the word theta, and just put in some slow wave oscillations. But the way I see it, a lot of it's not necessarily produced through sound engineering mechanisms. It's kind of just, I don't know, it almost sounds like AI. They've just got AI to just come up with something. What's that? Some question regarding drumming. Yeah, that's rhythmic stimulation. Drumming is this is the whole world of percussion and acoustics. It's so interesting because similar to martial arts, to Asian culture or Southeast Asian, meditation to South Asian culture is percussion to African culture. There's so much about rhythmic stimulation, about our body, how we respond to the external stimulation of percussions. It's kind of like how it's so easy to listen to house music or things like that of the sort. It's through rhythmic stimulation, but there's also emotional association with that. And it could be at a deeper level. There's also, I've spent a lot of my time working in the field of engineering, and the biggest takeaway is that energy cannot be destroyed, it can be transformed. Everything that exists in science and physical, all the formulas are based off the same thing. Energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be transformed. And you can extrapolate that to everything in life, really. Entrainment is drumming. Yeah, it would have to depend on the type of drumming. I like to go more. It's obviously drumming's quite vague, but
yeah, Dion. Sorry, Dion. I'm actually coming from a perspective of a sound healing practitioner, and we use drumming a lot for entrainment within our sessions, either one-to-one or in groups. You know, and with that heart, the synchronization of the heart and the entrainment. That was what I was referring to, just through the entrainment word out there with that.
Yeah, definitely. It's the same mechanisms. It's brain entrainment. It's the auditory steady state response and the following frequency response. They're the neural responses that essentially show, or that's what the scientists use to measure how strong the synchronization is. It's pain for me.
So did anyone else have any questions or comments for Dion before we close the session?
Some bits stimulate panic. So yes, we were talking about how there are physical responses, the neural responses, and then obviously it's how we associate meaning to it, which makes it different for everyone. And it's kind of like trauma. Everyone's going to respond differently, but there are still fundamental physical adaptations internally that happen. Does phone spoil 520? That's a different topic. That's more about the frequency of the carrier tone itself, but there's not much evidence linking 528 hertz per se. But the neutral tone, let's just say on piano, note C, 432 hertz is note C on the piano, and that was what everything was calibrated to. It was almost like the universal accepted frequency sound. But that's a bit more holistic. It's not so much related to science directly, per se. But the thing is, we can put emotion into anything. That's the key as well, and that's why there's so much potential. If enough people believe in 528 and use it, it can make a difference. And I'm seeing this from a very practical, pragmatic sense, entertaining the ideas of spirituality and emotional, because that really does have such an at the end of the day, we're sentimental creatures. Our ability to put so much meaning into things is the reason why sound is so complex. what hertz would work best for these people. I would start with understanding the trauma, to be honest. But acoustic masking would be the start. It's hard to say, like, for me to specifically say what will help their trauma. I would take the step back to go into it further. Yeah, it is a lot more of a, I have to tread pretty carefully here. Because I'm looking at it more from like, okay, we live in an overstimulated world. There's so much distraction around us. By reducing our distraction, that inherently is conducive to focus and productivity. So that is kind of different in that sense. But that is to say that I truly do believe there is certain implementations for certain things too. I'll be curious to take this chat offline and listen to what you actually use in your practices.
Mm.
That's all good. I'd say it's more holistic. It's being productive at your desk, doing the work that essentially runs your business without being so distracted. Because distraction's only going up. It's more so just how do you use sound to improve productivity, and productivity is inherently linked to business performance in some cases. Okay.
Questions or comments? Well done, Dion.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Dion. That was really interesting.
Yeah. I'll just finish off with what I'm working on. I'm building a platform, building an app as we speak, creating more music. I want to take this to institutional pilots and design clinical trials with universities, and then get government funding to essentially experiment with isochronic tones and brain entrainment, but taking it with a more credible approach.
Excellent. Donna, did you have anything to say before we finish?
Thanks, Dan. I think, it's hard to fit everything in an hour, as you say. But I think, you've started to touch on for us that how sound can be incorporated in wellbeing in many ways. And I think, it's probably good to take it offline and people can, have some more in-depth questions and answers if they want to. There's lots of, like, I'm particularly interested in tuning forks. And one really good thing that people can use for their own wellbeing is their own voice with humming and the effects of the vibration and those sort of things through the body. So, there's so much to cover in an hour. Thank you for, sorry?
Yes, quickly about humming. I think this is more related to most people here, but interesting research I came across. They compared humming, because typically at the end of a meditation, you got your ohms and stuff. And the physical practice of humming versus they tested it with a control variable of just hearing it externally.
Yep.
And the difference was like tenfold. The amount of nitric oxide in your nasal.
That's it.
Yeah, tenfold.
Yeah.
And low vibrations are literally linked to activating your parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah, and it's just so beneficial. Like with my clients that I work with, it's a really simple technique to teach people for them, for themselves, to calm their own system down, like particularly in the workplace. I get so many people who are stressed at work and they want a quick, how do I center myself? How do I calm? Because it does slow the breathing, the nitric oxide, there is definite physiological effects. So it's huge. Yeah. And very simple.
Yeah, so simple.
Yeah, so thank you. Appreciate your time and your effort. And it's a big subject for a small amount of time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's the start of something new, I think. Or it's been around, but it's a lost sense or lost art, and never in its time. The time is, it's only getting worse in terms of overstimulation. So the demand for tools to make our life more intentional and more efficient is only increasingly becoming more valued.
So maybe just one more tip for everyone in terms, because there's a couple of questions about like music with training, except social media feeds. I'm just going to drop a quick answer in for you. Is what is your intention with the music? So if you want to, a happy post on social media, then it's pretty obvious that you accompany it with a happy tune.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you want to go to higher levels of sophistication, particularly if you're giving a longer presentation or you're doing an all-day workshop, you are going to want to induce different emotions and moods in the participants at various times. And that is where you can use music to assist you in facilitating that. So that's about having a well-designed workshop and you being able to identify which emotions you want to elicit from your audience for an outcome. So obviously you're not going to put on AC/DC if you want a meditation, right? It sounds simple, but the skill in good audio is the ability to hold the attention and facilitate the brain states of, as in the waves, theta state. Mostly you want people in a theta state when you're teaching. So to understand
alpha as well, alpha theta.
Theta, alpha. So if you want, you're going to need to understand it a little bit more and be intentional with it, and it will absolutely transform the way you teach and the results that you get. Because the deeper the brain state, you're bypassing the conscious mind and all the objections and all of the patterning, etc. And you're working with the unconscious mind, which is what Donna's alluding to. And in the unconscious mind, another word for that is soul, superconscious. There's different layers. And that is where new neural pathways begin. So any of you that are familiar with NLP, my background, neuro-linguistic programming, it's very, very powerful. In actual fact, one of the first things that people learn when they're going to use NLP to teach is to facilitate those states. And it starts with you. So you need to be able to drop into that state automatically to be able to facilitate it in others. And then your teaching, your social media, whatever it might be, will go to a completely different level. So I hope that helps. It's a very short answer. Yes, but the power of sound...
I did,
will
for sure.
Support you enormously.
If I was to present it in person, I would have way more examples of implementation and what it actually sounds like, but it's a bit hard over Zoom. Coming back to your answer on Mariket's question, like, obviously everyone's different, but in terms of the vague question of helping people listen and take it in better, I still hang my hat on acoustic masking in a sense that it will definitely affect everyone in reducing their distraction. There's no doubt about that. I also do videography and media. So yes, definitely understand how sound anticipation really has an effect in our physiology. But definitely there's so many levels to this topic of sound from so many different fields as well. But at the end of the day, I just want to foster a community and continue to learn about sound and how we can use it as a tool. So it's one of our senses. It's one of our senses, so it's massive.
Excellent, Wendy. Okay, great.
That's great. Yeah, definitely.
So if this will be sent out the recording will be sent out to everybody here, as well as those who were unable to attend in person. So what you can do is you can either drop your email into the chat, and Dion can pick it up now if you want to stay in touch with him and follow his journey through. I definitely see a PhD in the future here, and then you can take any subjects offline if you want to stay in touch, or otherwise you can contact Interjobs, Paulina, or myself, or the admin team, and ask for Dion's details. Okay, so
I'll just drop my number as well.
So Dion's dropped his phone number in here. Wendy's given you her email. Dion,
okay,
Amanda. So there's probably a few that you can pick up. Excellent. All right. Well, let's unmute our mics. Everybody, please unmute. And let's give Dion a big round of applause. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone, for being
really great. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
For being here. We appreciate you, Dion. Mighty effort. Just stay online and I'll talk to you offline.
Yep.
And everyone else, this recording will be emailed to you later this afternoon or tomorrow. Meantime, stay well. Take good care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See ya.
Deb. Bye.